All right, from the studios in Fairfax City, we are very grateful that Chuck Well accepted our invitation to our show. Chuck, welcome to my humble podcast.
Oh my goodness. Good morning, Claudia. Thank you so much for having me. I
No, no,
appreciate it.
no problem. Let's go back to the beginning in your life, Chuck. Feel free. Were you born like in a musical family? What was your beginning in music when you were, I don't know, 5, 6, kind of stuff?
That's an interesting story that I don't talk about a lot, but it is important. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. My mom had played, she thought about maybe being a concert pianist. She was born in 1909 and went to Wellesley College. Not a lot of women went to college back then. And
Yeah.
mom learned how to play piano. Her father was a composer, just kind of for himself. And my dad was a sax player. So there was definitely music in the family. When I was 4 years old, mom and dad noticed that I kept falling down when I was out walking around, running on the street. And they took me to a doctor who determined that I had something called Perthes hip. And that's something where you have to, the healing for it, the hip didn't quite fit right.
Yeah.
And so the healing is simply to be off your feet for a year. So you can imagine a 4-year-old say, telling a 4-year-old you have to stay in bed. But my mom and dad were very creative. And we had a wonderful gal working for us. Her name was Edna Amos. And every day, Edna would carry me down to the piano and set me on the piano bench. That was allowed. I couldn't walk, but I could sit on the piano bench. And she taught me Heart and Soul was one song, Chopsticks. She taught me all this music. And the next year, when the doctor said it was okay for me to walk with a brace, I started taking piano lessons at age 5. My parents started taking me to church where I would sing in a church choir, but I didn't want to sing. I just wanted to sit behind the organist. And it was like a huge organ, like 40 rank organ. I mean, it was giant. And I would sit and watch. It had 4 or 5 keyboards, I think. And Gladys Combs was her name, Gladys Hamilton Combs, and she would let me sit next to her in the church organ and kind of pretend like I was playing. By the time I was 7 years old, I was completely healed from the leg problem. But that's how I got started in music, and I just love music. I learned to sing a little bit. I love singing in choirs. Most of all, I love playing the piano. And eventually, Gladys said, we're going to have these youth services over in a chapel. Would you like to play organ there? And I said, oh, yes, I want to play organ. So that's what I did. I learned how to play organ. And at the time, she said, part of it is when we have prayer or meditation, you just want to hold very slow chords and not, it's not like playing a hymn or something. You just hold it and kind of move to the next chord that comes to mind. And you do that. And to be honest, I enjoyed that period. I went off to college. I got a degree in business. I joined the Navy so that I wouldn't get drafted. That was the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Wow.
My roommate got drafted, and I said, oops, I'm going to get into Navy ROTC. I'd rather be on a ship. But who knew that years later I would remember that experience I was 14 years old when I started playing in church. And it was just simple, hymns and stuff. I did study music for 15 years. During college, I joined the choir, and I used to play. I played piano a lot. I lived in a fraternity house, and so I would play piano for, we'd do sing-alongs and all that stuff, especially around Christmas time or other holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, everyone would be singing a lot. So that's just kind of what I did. When I joined the Navy, strangely, the captain of my first ship, his name was Rod Stewart. He was not related to the Rod Stewart,
Yeah.
but he had been a singer in the Robert Shaw Chorale. He was actually a Baptist minister. But
Wow.
he joined the Navy and started singing in the Robert Shaw Chorale, before the Navy. So when he found out I could play piano, he said, "Ensign Waldron, come with me." And I'm like, "Yes, sir, Captain." And we would go out. We were stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, and we would go out to the bars in the evening, and he'd say, "Play piano, I'm going to sing." And he would sing. And, it was during the Vietnam War. It was a really tough time. And there were a lot of Americans over there that were under stress. And I kind of learned the power of music then. People would just crowd into the bars to hear him sing and hear me play piano. I don't even remember the songs, but they were kind of, joyful songs. Just songs like "Let's Sing Along." Honestly, I don't remember the actual songs, but so music was part of my life during the period that I was in the Navy. And when I got out, um, I already had a degree in business. So my dad said, "I will help you with your college expense, but you must work for me for 2 years after you get out of college and get out of the Navy." So, just to try my business, he was in insurance. And I said, "Dad, I think I want to be a musician." And he said, "That's okay, son. You can play in bands at night, but you need to pay me that debt."
That's
And
right.
sure enough, I joined a band. I started playing in bands. That was the beginning of my music career, I guess, was playing in bands at night. And mom and dad would come listen to me. And I think they eventually knew that, that was what I was called to do. Um, and I did come from a musical family. It's true. My great grandmother, I heard, was a piano teacher. I think she came to Missouri in the 1800s. My grandfather was born in 1865. So there
Wow.
was a lot of musical history. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's how I got to being in bands and being on the road. And that started in 1970. I went on the road and spent exactly 10 years on the road
Yeah. You,
paying my dues.
yeah, but you were playing with your own band, you were part of the group, you were part of the same
Ah,
group, or you were
that's Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you remember Edgar Winter, the, you know, amazing musician. He and his brother, Jonathan, was it? Um, they I heard Edgar in an interview once, and he said, "You need to go on the road and pay your dues. Don't worry about how, but just do it." So it was never my band. I was, I didn't live, I did not have an apartment even for almost, I guess, for 7 of those 10 years until I moved to Los Angeles. And I lived in the back of my van sometimes. I had 20 keyboards. There were no plugins. There was no internet. There were no computers hardly.
wow. Yeah.
And I lived in the back of my van and just went from one band to the other. Bands would break up. Excuse me. And I would say, "No problem. I'll find another band." And I would usually go to like an agent, and I'd say, you handle a lot of bands that are touring. Do you know anybody that needs a keyboard player?" I was never out of work. So, because I had all the keyboards,
Right. Yeah.
basically. And So I came to eventually, I realized I learned a little bit about meditation. Um, my sister, unfortunately, had passed on of cancer at a very young age, in her 50s, and her husband did too. They lived on the Beltway in Washington, D.C., prior to catalytic converters, and the incidence of cancer was 400% higher for people who lived on the Beltway, and they lived very close to it. They had 5 kids. They have 5 wonderful kids. I think she had 9 grandchildren by the time she passed on. And I don't know if it's that many. Sorry, but I kind of lost track. Anyway, I realized as I was trying to be there for family and traveling a lot with mom and dad, to be with Betsy as she got older, and Larry, her husband, I realized that I was going to have to be in New York or Los Angeles if I wanted to be in a pop band, and that was my goal. So I lived in New York for about a year and a half. I said, it is so expensive. I cannot stay here. And everyone was telling me, move to LA. It's a lot cheaper. In the meantime, I went to Florida, played in a band for about a year. I think it was 1978. And then, and I saved up money, and I actually waited tables on the nights that we weren't working. I would and I realized, when it was somebody's birthday, there was a piano in the restaurant, and I would play happy birthday and stuff. And all of a sudden, I got these huge tips.
Sure, of course.
Like $100. Well, you made my birthday. And I realized, it's time for me to go to LA. I got in the car and or in my van, drove across the country, got in the band, and went to the Musicians Contact Service. I think it is still in existence here in Los Angeles. And I auditioned for a huge number of bands. It was close to 100, but I wanted a band that everybody wanted keyboard players. So I just spent all my time going and playing and saying, do you guys write your own music? No, we're a top 40 band. Wanted a band that wrote their own music. And one day, Dale Bozio called me. It was my birthday, September 22nd, 1980. I actually remember the day. And Dale said, hi, my name's Dale Bozio, and we have this band. We all work for Frank Zappa. And I went,
Wow.
you have my attention. And, her husband, Terry, one of the greatest drummers in the world, without a doubt, and Dale and Warren Cucurullo, an amazing, fantastic guitarist, and Dale, former Playboy Bunny, and she just said, will you come and audition for our band? And I said, you know what, Dale, it's my birthday. Can we do it another day, maybe? And she said, no, you need to come today because we're going to take you out to birthday dinner. And that's who Dale was. She was this fun-loving, beautiful spirit. And I said, okay, I'll come. I don't have any other plans. I don't, know that many people here. And I auditioned, and I didn't make the cut because when I got there, Terry said, I had my mini Moog, which was a synthesizer. I had it on one side and then my OBX. And he said, I want you to move your mini Moog over to the left. And I said, well, I usually play it with my right hand, I do solos and stuff. And he said, we don't need solos. We need a bass player. He said, I'll show you the bass part, and the keyboard parts are easy. You can play that with your right hand and your bass with the left hand. I had never done that before. So anyway, we went out to dinner. They took me out to dinner at an Italian restaurant on Robertson. They were all of Sicilian, I think, yeah, they're all either Sicilian or Italian descent. And so, of course, we went to wonderful Italian restaurant, had a meal, and I said to them during dinner, I said, can you give me a cassette of the songs? Because there were only cassettes, no CDs, no internet.
Sure.
Give me a cassette of the songs, and maybe I'll go home and practice and see if I can learn them. I wanted to be in that band so badly. I went home, and every morning I was working a day job then for a wonderful Czechoslovakian fellow who owned a musical instrument company. And I was his accountant because I had a degree. I was his assistant accountant.
Yep.
His accountant wanted to go back to Europe and visit her family. And so she taught me how to do it. The company was called European Crafts. I think they may still be in business. Anyway, I would get up at 5 o'clock every morning and start practicing. And after about 10 days, I called Dale back and I said, can I audition again? And I got the job. And all of a sudden, I was one of the missing persons. Patrick O'Hearn had not yet joined the band. And Missing Persons was amazingly sold out. We sold out 40 shows before the band got signed. A lot of people didn't understand the band. Terry used to say, the musicianship makes the band credible. Dale makes the band incredible. Incredible. And it was true. She wore these amazing outfits. We all dyed our hair blue. This was 1980, right? It wasn't really the thing. Now everyone has dyed hair.
Well, amazing story, because now, 80, we are 45 years later, so millions listen to your music weekly on the stream site, and I'm quite sure you receive thousands of messages on a weekly basis from people loving your music, anxiety, stress relief, cancer, and so on and so forth. So although you went from, I don't know, waiting tables and living in a van with no apartment, and now all of a sudden you began very, very, very famous. Had you done very well for yourself, man. Wow, what a journey, man.
Thank you for the kind words. I always have kind of avoided fame. I don't really think about that. I don't think about the money. I think after I got out of Missing Persons, which was 1984, I started writing songs with people. I had worked in studios, and I talked to Gary Scardina, who owned a studio. He wrote the song, the great song for the Pointer Sisters. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. It was their biggest song. Anyway, Gary was a great, songwriter, and he introduced me to a gal named Marty Sharon. And Marty and I started writing songs, and she was signed to Warner, actually to a company called Lorimar Telepictures. And I got a deal with Lorimar as well. And a wonderful gal named Linda Perry, who was the former wife of Richard Perry, the great producer who just passed away. May rest in peace, golly. An amazing, amazing producer. And I got to learn from him, and being signed to Warner's was very interesting. I had, I don't know, maybe 25 songs recorded, used in films and stuff. Nothing that was a huge hit until I co-wrote a song with Marty called You're My One and Only, and it became a #1 song in Europe, actually, for an artist named Jennifer Rush. And by that time, Warner's had offered me a composing gig on the Max Headroom TV series. And I have to say, the hours, I think I mentioned before we were starting, the hours were insane on the series. A wonderful British fellow by the name of Peter Wagg had been sort of the founder of Max Headroom, had this idea for a computerized character Nobody had those on TV back then. And Max, was just an amazing show to be on. It was a lot of fun. I did it with Michael Hoenig who had been in Tangerine Dream. And there were so many great bands back then. Oh my gosh. Brian Eno, uh, just to go on and on, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Peter Gabriel, the whole,
Yeah,
what a time to be in music. And I was um, happy to be able to work in any aspect of music. And they said, well, you just do some scoring with Michael at his studio downtown. But the show got really far behind schedule, probably because they were trying to automate this character, in. And so we sometimes only had a couple of days to come up with 43 minutes of music, to write it, to record it. If we had to bring in other musicians to do that, then to mix the music, on and on. It was very, very difficult. So we worked 20 hours a day, and Michael's wife was an artist, and she had a painting studio in the same building as the studio, and I slept in there for the 4 hours a night that I did. And it was really tough for 3 months. I started feeling very tense. I didn't know what that was. And at the same time, very tragically, my friends were dying of AIDS. And I was like, holy cow, what is going on here? Nobody really knew exactly what it was. They think it's a virus. There was no vaccine. Nobody knew what to do. And one day I was at a spotting session. A spotting session is where they show you footage. Here's a scene, we want the music. And I started going like this. I was hyperventilating, that's what it's called. And I had a panic attack. And Peter thought I was having a heart attack. So he very smartly said, come with me. He dragged me out to his Porsche, which was right outside the door, drove 100 miles an hour and to the nearest urgent care. And they rushed me. And he said, this guy is having a heart attack. You have to see him. The doctors all looked at me and they said, don't worry, Chuck, you're not having a heart attack. You're having what's called an anxiety attack. And I'm like, but I feel like I can't slow down. I'm really tense. And I'm like, I'm talking 100 miles an hour. I'm breathing, like hyperventilating. And at that moment in time, it really was a changing point in my life. The doctor held up 2 pieces of paper. He said, these are meditation instructions, and these are medication instructions. An RX, a prescription. He said, for a lot of people, they both work about the same. They're only 1 letter difference, meditation and medication. And at the time, I didn't understand that really. I said, well, I'll take the medication. I took a 1 day and it almost put me to sleep. And I said, I can't take this. I'm going to have to try the meditation. I had no idea what to do. I called one of my best friends at the time. J.S. Kingfisher is the name he goes by now, an amazing composer. And Jeff said, he said, I have a couple of suggestions. I think there are these Taoist masters, they're 38th generation Chinese healers, Mao Xingni and Dao Xingni. And they're brothers, and their dad is this really well-known master. Excuse me. They do acupuncture. He said, that's one suggestion. The other suggestion, I want you to see a counselor, a friend of mine named Susan. And so I went to see Mao Xing and Dao Xingni, and they said, they both looked at me, and 1 week I would be treated or 1 day by one of them, and another day by the other. And they said, Chuck, you almost killed yourself from overwork. You cannot work 20 hours a day. He said, you need to have a lot of acupuncture and herbs. I went 5 days a week. They gave me acupuncture for at least 2 months. I took Chinese herbs for 1 year. And during that period of time, I became agoraphobic. I didn't want to leave my house. And I said, can you guys tell me how to meditate? And they had written books, and they said, we'll teach you a color meditation where you simply sit and breathe in. You think of a color, and certain colors are related to certain organs in the body. That's Chinese medicine. And Chinese medicine has a 3,000-year history. So I thought, I think I need to try this. And I did. I started meditating. I also got an appointment with Susan. And at some point, she asked me not to use her last name in interviews and stuff. So I don't. I certainly respect that. And in one of my sessions with Susan, she said to me, Chuck, I want you to, she said, you're a composer. What kind of music do you compose? I said, well, it's kind of like, pop music, all that. She said, I want you to compose music that represents the way you'd like to feel, not the way you feel. And I thought, She said, not only that, we're not going to continue our sessions until you do that. She said, I want you to bring me a cassette. And that happened to me twice in consultations, in therapy. And so I went home, and I had been sending music. When I was in Missing Persons, I met Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw. They wrote a book called Life Extension, and I had read the book, and I met them. We were staying in that same hotel when Missing Persons was in New York City. We were gigging out on Long Island, I think, at the time, probably 1984. Anyway, I had met them, and I always stayed in touch with them because they lived in the LA area. And I would send them little pieces of music, and it was always really fast stuff. And I remember doing this. I don't know why. But one day I was meditating. I was just sitting there. And this was 1988, actually. And I breathe in and breathe out. I breathe in, I count the number 1. I breathe out, I'd count the number 2 quietly. And I would do that, and that helped relax me for some reason. I always liked numbers. And I remembered playing organ in church. And I said, wow, I know how to do that slow music that represents the way I'd like to feel. And I got up, I went into my studio, which was in my living room in my house, and I started just holding chords, and I sent some of it to Dirk and Sandy. They said, wow, this is really relaxing. I also, eventually, I had gotten a dog, and she was blind, but bless her heart, her name was Love Dog. And Love Dog, when I would start playing this music, she'd come over and bump into my leg and fall asleep at my feet. And she never did that. She wasn't that old. I don't know how she lost her vision, but Love Dog would fall asleep. And so I thought, I think I've got something. And I recorded a piece that was 28 minutes long. And I said, wow, I don't know what to call this piece. And then I said, Zero. I'm going to call it Zero. And then I thought, that's kind of weird. And so I thought, when you're at latitude and longitude, I had studied a little bit about that, studying geography in college. And I thought 0 degrees 0, that represents the way I like to feel. I mean, that represents, excuse me, the way I do feel. I feel like I'm at 0 and 0. And eventually I got in therapy. I did that piece. I made cassettes. My assistant, his name was Nathan, and I made hundreds of cassettes. I took them around, just this one 28-minute piece on both sides, and I put them on 30-minute cassettes so people could just put them on repeat, like the cassette players you could repeat. We went to all the AIDS hospices. I had some family members at the time that were ill with cancer. I gave them to her, and I started getting feedback. And people said, you know, this music, like, it puts me to sleep. It's kind of boring. And I said, yes, it's boring on purpose. I want it to be boring. I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be a pop star. I want to do music that helps people. This music helped me. Maybe it'll help someone else. And when I was in therapy, and my therapist said one day, my assistant would have to take me to therapy because I was afraid to drive. I was like, still had the anxiety thing. And this is the late 80s, and I'm in therapy. And one day my therapist said, I don't want to continue unless you get in your car and drive somewhere on your own and spend one night away from your house. And I'm like, I really don't want to do that. But I did it. And I chose, because I've always liked water, the Navy, I was pretty relaxed when I was in the Navy. I chose Laguna Beach, California. I went down there, I rented a room, and I said, I could hear the ocean. And I went, wow, that is so nice. I'm going to actually walk down the hill. I walked down the hill, I sat on the rocks, and all of a sudden, all my anxiety went away. I mean, it literally did. I just went, wow, this is kind of a miracle. It didn't go away permanently, but it did go away. And I thought, it's the sound of the liquid is relaxing my mind. And I said, that's it. I'm going to do Liquid Mind. I went back to my room. I actually went out to eat. I went to a local club and had a beer, I think, or something. I don't drink now, but back then I did. And I thought, this is a turning point. I'm going to do music called Liquid Mind. And the first piece is 0 Degrees Zero, and I'm going to put an album out. I have no idea how to do it. And I don't have the money either. And I got into therapy. I was able to be functional. I kept writing songs for Lorimar, which then was purchased by Warner Brothers Music. And I was signed to Warner Chappell Music for some years. And that was my gig. And then in 1994, I was sitting, again, another turning point for me. I was sitting in my living room and I was breathing in, counting numbers, breathing out. I meditated for about an hour, which is amazing for me that I could even, do that. And what I was meditating about was, how am I going to get the money to bring this music to the world? And the phone rang. And God, I almost get choked up when I think about this. The phone rang, and it was a fellow who I'd stayed in touch with named Bruce Swedian. Bruce was a 5-time Grammy winner who produced one of the Missing Persons albums. That's how I met him. We had always stayed in touch, and he'd always encouraged me with my slow music. He knew about it. He said, one of these days, he said, don't stop it. You need to do that. But he called me this day and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm working with you, Bruce. His assistant had called me before, and I always said, I'm so busy, I don't have time. But when Bruce called for some reason, I said, I'm working with you. And he said, great. He said, I'm working with the glove, and he wants you to create sounds. He likes the sounds that you made in Missing Persons, the programming, the synth programming.
Yep.
And I knew that the glove was Michael Jackson. And I said, okay, Bruce, I said, you're in New York, right? I said, do you want me to come to New York? And he said, no, you work there at home. You can send us your sounds every day. Go to FedEx, because there was no transmitting on the internet.
Yeah, no internet.
And I said, Bruce, the only thing is I need something called a synclavier to make some really unique sounds. This is the very beginning of computer music. And I need the synclavier. And I knew that it cost $250,000. Today, that's a lot of money. Back then, with the value of the dollar, that's probably close to $1 million.
Correct.
In today's dollars. And he said, great, it'll be there tomorrow. And I'm like, what? He said, yes, there's a fellow named Martin Royer, and he has some of them, and he works with us sometimes. And I said, well, I don't know that much about renting. And he said, Martin will come over and train you for a couple of weeks, and then you'll start making the sounds. And I did that off and on for 4 years for Michael. And they had moved back east because of the earthquake. I think that was 1994. And then they moved back to LA as things got safer, to Record One, I think, out on Ventura Boulevard. So I would go out every day and meet with Michael, and I'd have to stand in line. There'd be like, my idols would be waiting in line for him, Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis. I'm like, what am I doing in the same room with these people? And I would play the sounds for Michael and say, I like this, I like that. Could you do this? I'd like you to make a soundscape for They Don't Care About Us. That's one of the soundscapes that I did. And he said, and I just want you to make a lot of sounds. I made, I think, over 1,000 sounds. He said, I want things that the human ear has never heard. And back then that was fairly easy because computers were new. Everybody was just used to regular sounds. So that was my job. And that gave me the money to hire a consultant by the name of Suzanne Doucet. Suzanne owned a store on Melrose Boulevard called Only New Age Music. And I learned by that store that there's this whole genre out there. And I went, talked to Suzanne, and she said, yes, I could consult with you. She showed me how to start my label. She said, it's going to cost $100,000. And I'm like, oh no. But I saved everything I made. And what I earned from Michael, I used to start my label. Eventually, the label got too large. After 10 years, I was actually making money. I had employees. And I decided to sign as my sister got ill with cancer and I wanted to travel. I told Michael in 1998, I need to, go out and take care of my family, be there with my family. So I did that, and by 2004, Suzanne had introduced me to a couple, Terrence Yallop and his wife Karen Kale, and they owned a company called Real Music. And Suzanne said, they've been listening. The owners have been meditating to your music every day since I sent it to them, which was 1994, 1995. They love your music, and they know that you want to run your own label, but they lived up in Sausalito, California, and that's in the San Francisco Bay, right on the water. And I thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to go up there. It's a nice trip. So I flew up there and I met with them, and I realized they had this vision of healing music, and all the artists that were signed to them were in that same vision. There was nothing like Liquid Mind that was music for sleep, but it was all bands like 2002, Bernard Koch, all just so many bands, and really, really great groups. And so I signed to them, and then I guess for about 12 years, we put out albums, collections. They own 7 of the albums. I own the first few albums, and the ones I've done since then, 13 of the albums. So, and they helped a lot. I took every penny I made from Michael. I went to conventions. I went to 400 music stores, actually.
Wow.
All over the United States. Yeah, back then, that's what you did. There was no taking out ads on Spotify.
That's right.
Or, you had to do that. And in time, I've just continued. I believe my motto, it's on my liquidmindmusic.com website, that world peace begins with inner peace. And we've had such a time of crisis. I mean, historically, there's always been crises in one part or another of the world, and even in the United States, we've had stuff happening, and I do believe that when we do our own work to create inner peace within ourselves, that we help create world peace. We create peace with our neighbors, with whatever. And every album title in the Liquid Mind series has been a step in my own healing, I guess. If I look at the releases, I'm just going to actually refer to it so I don't spend too much time thinking about it. But the first album was called Ambience Minimus because I wanted my surroundings to be quieter. The second album, Slow World, I had a vision that my friends who had passed on, I lost over 60 friends to AIDS, and I was very upset that the government wasn't doing more to help. But I envisioned that they lived on a place called Slow World, and there's a song called Blue 7, and I thought maybe that's the album. But then I thought, no, Slow World and Blue 7 is just a song. Liquid Mind 3, I started numbering them. I said, I think I'm going to do more than a couple. And it was called Balance, learning how to balance work and play, and to be healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, not just a little bit healthy, but healthy everywhere, to have joy in life and joy outside of work. I learned over the time to be of service to others, and that's actually what led to the new album. But Serenity, Unity, Spirit was one of the album titles, then Reflection. The Sleep album is probably the most popular album, that and the follow-up Deep Sleep later. I was extremely lucky that one of the gals that worked at Real Music sent they were up in the Bay Area, and they knew of the Stanford Sleep Clinic. And William Dement, who I think is still alive, I'm not sure. Last I checked, he was 97. And William he was the founder of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and one of the founders of REM Sleep. He had actually done the research in Chicago for REM Sleep. And he listened to my music and he said, I really like this music. You can quote me that this music would be a great part of a pre-sleep routine for people who are having trouble relaxing. and he wrote a book which I had read, and he allowed me to quote him. And there's a quote on the album from Dr. Dement, and he recommended listening to the music before sleep, and I do too. The album was called Sleep, but I have sleep tips on my website, and they say listen before, not during sleep. You don't want to keep your mind busy. I know thousands of people listen to my music during sleep, or maybe I say, put it on a timer and just let it phase out after 30 minutes or something. A lullaby, music for kids, relaxing rain and ocean mixes. That was a collection of previous pieces where I added in ocean and rain sounds. A deep sleep was more about sleep. Liquid Mind 12, I was back on my own now. I wanted a music about peace in the world. In 2018, there was a lot, and there still is, but a lot going on in the world and in the United States and politically, and people refusing to speak to each other. And I thought, I'm going to create an album just for myself that are the steps to achieving peace with other people. And I made the statement that I believe I can have peace with any person in the world, no matter how much I disagree with them. And there are people that we all disagree with, but there are steps, that I can take. And that album I sent to every member of the United States Congress. I sent it to every member of the U.S. Supreme Court. I heard back from Anton Kennedy, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote me a thank you note.
Wow.
Kennedy said, I listen to your music all weekend. I don't listen during the week. But he said, I listen to it during the weekend. I sent it to every member of Congress, every governor. I got a few messages back, letters actually back then, from state governors, or people in their office. Hi, the governor asked me to thank you for sending that music. And I just kept giving it away, give it away, give it away. And anyway, that was the Peace album. I think it was 2020, Real Music was sold to a British company called Cutting Edge. And I started working with a fellow named Darren Blumenthal. And Darren and I talked about, what would be the focus of the next album? It's my albums, but they're the distributor. And they kindly, would advise me. And I would talk to Terrence Yallop still, even though he had retired after they sold Real Music. And everybody was talking about mindfulness. And mindfulness, being in the moment. And that was something that I thought, I need to learn this. So I did an album called Mindfulness, and that was the focus. I did a collection called Musical Healthcare. All this time I had been working with a couple of people from the American Music Therapy Association. They mentored me starting in the mid-90s. A gal named Alicia Clare, who was president of the American Music Therapy Association. She was from Topeka, Kansas. So she was a teacher at the University of Kansas, where I graduated from. So I would go up and say hi to her. And she introduced me to Barb Else. And Barb was a flautist, but the senior research assistant for the American Music Therapy Association back then. And she mentored me. And she said, Chuck, you're getting so many letters and emails now. We need to examine those and do a content analysis and see how your music is used. And amazingly, I found out, well, not amazingly, I guess, that meditation, sleep, people in chemotherapy, drug rehab. I heard from a fellow who was head of the rehab programs at the university, at the Pennsylvania prison system. And he said, the prisoners that are in rehab listen to your music all the time. He said, thank you, thank you. And I'm like, wow, I just never thought about that. And so there were all these ways that the music is used. And again, on the homepage of the liquidmindmusic.com, there's a little button you can push how this music is used. And it explains all the ways that I've heard from people, obviously massage therapy, yoga classes, and so forth. In 2022, to kind of move closer to the new album, the word distraction was on my mind constantly. I love tech. I love the changes, the good changes in our world. But there's also this little thing called distraction where I could stay online 24 hours a day. Yay. Not. That would not be healthy for me. And I thought I need to simplify. I need to set boundaries. And so Liquid Mind 14 was an album for me about setting boundaries, bringing simplicity to my life. I do that through meditation, which gives me perspective. I do that through focusing on my values. And I studied under a great fellow named David Walker, the late David Walker. And he would always talk about honoring your values, health, love, work, being financially sustainable, joy in life. And he always taught, David would say, sometimes you need to prioritize these things. And that's what I couldn't do. And the album Simplicity taught me about, having prioritizing good health so I can help myself and help others and be there for family and friends and people that I don't know and be of service to others. Health, meaningful work, finding what really means something for me. Meaningful work, meaningful relationships, very important. I can create that, not just in the obvious ways, being in love, giving love to others through being of service. Being of service is helping someone, and that's an exchange of love. So that's where simplicity came from, being financially sustainable, not checking out on the, when I'm spending too much money, doing my budget every month. In the meantime, in 2023, I did a single, the first piece of music I ever did with anyone else. And I was sitting in a vegan restaurant with my nephew and his wife and their two daughters. We were down in Orange County, and we were sitting in a restaurant and just eating dinner. It was a vegan restaurant. I'm mostly vegan, with a little bit of fish every now and then. And there was a guitar player and a flautist playing. And I went up and shook hands with them and said, thank you for the beautiful music. We're just eating dinner here. But and the flautist said, thanks, my name's Brian.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I shook Brian's hand, and Brian said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a musician. I said, my name is Chuck Wild. And he turned red or blue or whatever. He went, Chuck Wild, like Liquid Mind, Chuck Wild. And I realized, my music had been out there for a lot of years. He said, I grew up to your music. I've been listening to it since I was a child. And I'm like, oh my God. I said, Brian, we have to get together. And I said, give me your phone number. We exchanged numbers. And we got together in my studio one day, and I said, maybe we should, do a remix of one of my songs, just put a single out there. we did it, and it became the most listened to piece of the Liquid Mind series in that year. And I'm going to do more work with Brian. I just haven't had time recently. And so that was a single that was notable. Brian's a jazz musician, has his own band. They play all around LA. I don't know if they've gone on the road yet. Very, very talented guy. I look forward to working with him again. That leads us to this year. And I'm going to have a quick drink
Sure.
of water. I talked a little more than I probably should have. And I thought, what I need, after the just so much that's going on in the world, all the conflict. And I just said to myself, I want to learn to live in the love. I want to know how to be in the love, not in love. I've been in love before. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes it can be painful. But I want to learn how to live in the love, in a state of love. And I got to thinking about that, and I went, there's a lot of ways to exchange love in the world and to be in the love. I can do that every day of my life in everything I do. If I'm, meeting with my best friend for dinner, I can bring a good spirit there. I can say, love you, buddy. I can, when my assistant comes to work, he was my assistant. He's now the co-producer. And I do want to talk about Jonathan Morozic is his name. Um, you know, I can treat him with respect, and I can have our business relationship be a loving relationship. Uh, in the way of just being very respectful of him. He's quite young. He's 28, and he's an electrical engineering student. He's about to graduate from Cal State Long Beach. And Jonathan started working for me about 8 years ago. And I realized he was very technically oriented, a really, really smart kid. And so I started showing him how I was programming the music. And he started doing some of the programming. And I said, And then I think in Mindfulness, he was the associate producer. And then on Simplicity, he became the co-producer. So he could participate, financially in the albums. And he does a lot of the work, I will say now. It's wonderful. I keep saying, Jonathan, don't you want to be in the music? He's like, well, Chuck, that's okay. I'm still studying. So one of these days, I think he'll probably go off to his engineering career. It's a great degree to have, kind of like a business degree, and it helps
Sure.
you learn. So that's how In the Love came to be. It was me learning to be, even with people I disagree with, and I don't agree with everyone all the time, but instead of renting my mind out to the anger and hate, it's easy to go there if you don't like something that somebody did. Instead, I know to sit down and meditate for 5 minutes, or do a gratitude list. I like doing gratitude lists. I have posted in my studio something called the Optimist Creed, and one of them says, that I will forget about the mistakes of the past and press on to greater achievements of the future. My life has not been perfect by any means, but I learned to let go of that. I have at least one or two songs that have the phrase letting go. And that's a big part of life for me, is to learn how to let go and to move forward and give the musical gifts as long as my brain allows me to do that. And, back to what I was saying, sort of my slogan is that world peace begins with inner peace. Inner peace can lead to world peace, one person at a time, one step at a time. that's kind of my focus on the new album. It's coming
Yeah.
out. Feel free to air it whenever you like.
Yeah.
But the album is coming out this coming Friday. I have just a quick advertisement here. I have a little Kansas City
All
Chiefs
right.
playing in the Super Bowl. I have my
Good.
ball cap ready for tonight.
For tonight, yeah, with the matching shirts, yellow and yellow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good. How you manage? You say something very interesting, right? As human beings, we argue with people, we disagree, and let's say you have an argument with your friend Johnny, whatever. Of course, you don't want to call him right away because you are in an argument with him, and so you meditate. But eventually, you will talk to Johnny, right? How you manage that? Well, because you meditate in the moment, your anger, disagreement, whatever disappear, right? But you know that you will have lunch with
Right.
hypothetical Johnny tomorrow. How you manage though? Because
So
eventually you will need to face someone, right? Or
I
talk
would
to
say that Jonathan and I disagree about a lot of things. He's
yeah,
a whole different generation,
sure.
and we talk things out. The
Hmm.
first thing I do is I say, we disagree about something. Please tell me about that. What are your thoughts? I think the most important thing is for me to ask someone else's opinion. And in the moment, if I'm angry, I really have to take a deep breath. I don't get angry at him, but we do disagree a lot. And it's a good thing. I think, disagreements can be very, very productive. I learned that in the Navy, actually. The admiral, I worked for an admiral, and he said, I want to know everyone's opinions, whether I agree with them or not. And I'd kind of forgotten that over the years, but I relearned that. And so we'll sit there and I'll listen to what he has to say. And then he'll ask me. I'll say, we can ask each other our opinions. And I'll just take whatever, 15, 20 minutes out of work. And we sit in chairs and facing each other sometimes. And we have disagreed on things. And, we just talk it out. And I say, you might have some points. There's another phrase that I use, maybe one of the most important things that I say. Let me think about it. Instead of saying, no, I don't want that, Instead of that, I just go, let me think about it. You might be right. Let me think about it. And that's how I deal with disagreements. And, I don't have time to meditate all the time. Sometimes I can I do a walking meditation. Well, I had a gal that was an acupuncturist for me, a Korean gal, and she said, I meditate when I walk. And I realized that I try and walk 60 to 80 minutes a day somewhere. And I meditate while I walk. I count numbers. I think, if I'm outside, I pay attention to traffic, but that can be meditational. So there are all kinds of different ways to meditate, I guess. And but anyway, to answer your question, it's, you might be right. Let me think about it. Sometimes I'll just say, we can agree to disagree. And I think that's an important thing in the workplace about that sort of thing.
Looking back in your life, are you happy? I mean, we all make decisions that we may hindsight say, man, I should have done this or say that or marry that person or fight with an argument. But in general, you have make peace with yourself and
I would say in general,
yeah.
there are a lot of things that I regret, but I don't live in the regret.
Yeah.
I live in the feeling that I did the best I could with what I had at that moment in time.
Yeah.
I wish I had had kids, and I had gals approach me and say, would you like to have kids? Would you like to have children together? And I chose not to because I didn't have the money at the time, and I didn't want to give up my music career. And whether that was a good decision or not, I've learned over the years that I can nurture people in other ways by sharing my own experience, by helping people in different ways. Um, so I do have regrets, of course. We all make mistakes, but I let go of the past and press on to greater achievements of the future, as they say in the Optimist Creed. Um,
Yeah.
there's one more book I would mention, a book called Feeling Good, A New Mood Therapy by Dr. David Burns. And that book was another thing that changed my life. One of my songwriting pals, her name is Susan Sheridan, and Sue wrote music for TV back in the 70s and 80s and a lot of hit songs. And Sue was amazing. And she said, Chuck, there's a book called Feeling Good. You might want to check it out. And Feeling Good is sort of the instruction manual for cognitive self-therapy. And what cognitive therapy is, I can't remember who first discovered this back in the 1940s, but Feeling Good, if you read the first 60 pages of it, it talks about that most anxiety and depression is caused by cognitive distortions. Dr. Aaron Beck, that is the guy's name, back in the 1940s. And he discovered, after a lot of research, that there are 10 cognitive distortions. And those cognitive distortions are things like black and white thinking. They call it all or nothing thinking. I've had a bad day, so every day in my life is going to be a bad day. Another one is overgeneralization, which is that a single event, is going to be a never-ending pattern of bad things in my life. So there are all these things, emotional reasoning. I won't go through them all, but jumping to conclusions. Wow. How many times do I still jump to conclusions and say, well, that's what's going to happen? But I'm not a fortune teller. I can't read the future. So the cognitive self-therapy teaches something called 3-column work. And I have a Word document that I made that has 3 columns. One is what's going on in my life? What's the repetitive thought I'm having? I'm sick, I'll never get well. So I write that down in column 1. In column 2, you identify which of the cognitive distortions is that. So in that case, it might be jumping to conclusions, being a fortune teller, mislabeling myself as being sick all the time. Disqualifying the positive is another one. It's all in this book, Feeling Good. It's been out for, it was a bestseller for years. Anyway, I identify the cognitive distortions. And then in the 3rd column, I write, what's a rational response? The rational response is, yes, I'm sick, but I'll probably get well. The doctor thinks I'm going to be okay. It's something that I can manage. Maybe, maybe it's something that's ongoing that becomes chronic, but I learn ways to manage it. I can still have a good life. Here are 5 good things in my life. I own a car, I have a house, I'm in general good health. And that helps correct my thinking. So cognitive self-therapy is me brainwashing myself, I guess, washing out the distortions. It's me training myself how to think. And that truly has changed my life. because we all have difficult times. You know, when my parents were passing on, they lived into their 90s. May they rest in peace. And they had good lives, but it was tough. You know, my sister had died of cancer already, and that was hard on them. And, you know, after they passed on, I became the oldest member of the family. There might be some responsibilities that go along with that, not just nurturing, but business-wise and things. And cognitive therapy helps me when I have those rough spots.
Good for you. Good for you, man. Yeah, do your music, and although you were poor and you live in a van and you didn't have enough money, enough to eat or something, or you didn't have a place to, you have done very well for yourself. You have made a lot of people happy, and people all over the world are listening to back then tapes, CDs, MP3. You have a wonderful channel on YouTube, right? That if anybody doesn't have the funds to, buy, people can listen to your music before going to sleep, or I don't know. Some people have good opinions or bad opinions on Spotify, but you can listen to your music there. If you don't have the funds to, buy it or go into Bandcamp, whatever. But you have done something very important in the world, right? So, of course, money is important, and paying the bills is important, but besides the money and the fame, you are a good human being, and that's
Oh
important.
gosh, I don't know.
we,
I'm persistent.
we live in crazy times. People crying, Russia, Ukraine, and Palestine, and Israel, and some people, they don't like this president and that president, whatever it is, right? You have done something very important and positive to the world, and good for you, man. You got to look back in your life and say, well, I kept, eventually I'm going to pass on, but people will hopefully remember me for the good stuff that I did for others, which you have. So
yes, that's what I turned 79 this year. So,
but you have still a long way to go, man.
Yeah, I think so.
You're releasing your new album next Friday, and for sure it's going to be many, many.
I hope so.
It was very nice talking to you, Chuck. Good luck to you.
Great speaking with you.
Hopefully, when I'm in California one day, we'll get together for coffee.
We have lunch. It's on me. Lunch, dinner, whatever's convenient.
Thank you very much. It was very nice talking to you, man. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.